So to wrap up this episode, I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about the long-term consequences of the Winter War, whether it pertains to actual relationship between Finland and the USSR during the Cold War, or maybe today, or when it comes to the, our favorite topic, propaganda wars. So who would like to tackle which side of the question? You don't have to cover it. We could do it pretty briefly because we've been going for a while, and I know it's getting late, especially in St. Petersburg.
So basically, I'll just speak briefly about Soviet-Finnish relations after the war. The Soviet Union managed to force Finland to sign a peace agreement in 1944 with its offensive. I won't go far into detail, although this detail is quite curious about how the Finns struck a deal with the Germans and double-crossed them after that. But that's a different topic to discuss. In the end of the day, the Soviet Union signed an armistice with Finland, and then the peace treaty in 1947. And according to this peace treaty, Finland had to pay huge reparations to the Soviet Union. It established a naval base right next to Helsinki in Porkala. The distance to Helsinki was something like 50-something kilometers, so it was extremely close. It was like a dagger to the neck of the Finnish government. And it's curiously enough, this agreement helped the Finns restore to develop their industry, because since Finland had no money to pay with, their factories had to pay the Soviet Union back with their goods. And since they didn't have any advanced industry, the Soviet Union was had a readily prepared market for them, although this market was meant for providing the Soviet Union with the compensation for the damages. Still, even after that, the Finns produced, I would say by European standards, second-rate goods. And the Soviet Union eagerly bought them because the Finland promised to be a completely neutral country. So there was the so-called policy of Finlandization, it maintained its democratic institutions, and it was not part of the Soviet bloc. But at the same time, it's stayed away from all Western alliances, from any cooperation with NATO, America, or any other countries that were hostile to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union paid Finland back not only by kind of being friendly in all ways and buying Finnish goods, and this allowed the Finnish economy to prosper in the 50s and 60s. It also, and this is something that a lot of Russian people do not know, these facts started getting uncovered to the broad public literally a couple of years ago, when the relationship with Finland drastically worsened, and you know why. The Soviet government decided to suppress practically all memory of the Finnish concentration camps, the ones that I've already described. There were mentions of fascist crimes on the Karelian territory, but there were no memorials, no big monuments to the victims of these camps. The people who wanted to write dissertations or theses or books on the subject were told to kind of slow down. And the association, the first meeting of the Association of Finnish Prisoners of War took place in the late 1980s, and it was actually not sponsored, but organized by the Finnish writer Seppälä, who wrote about the crimes of the Finnish military administration on the Karelian territory. And literally up to the last few years, there was very little information about the Finnish prison camps in Karelia, and personally, I've met a number of people, not a lot, but still, there are still seemingly well-educated Russian people who have no idea that Finland participated in the war. And the only explanation is that it was never taught at schools. It was skirted around at schools or like in popular stories about the war. If you look at Soviet military encyclopedia, you would definitely see that the Finnish troops invaded, but that's pure. Whoever cares about encyclopedias or like big tomes of whatever. The way it was told at schools, the way it was shown in the media. For example, there's the super famous Soviet movie, which became, by the way, it became a huge hit in China. The Dawns Are Quiet Here, about a group of girls, like the anti-crowd gunners. The plot of this whole movie takes place on the territory of Karelia. Neither in the movie nor in the novel that the movie is based upon. First German division, the nearest German units, and the author describes the place, the approximate area where this like anti-aircraft like personnel were located, and the nearest German unit was within like 200 kilometers away. So basically, it was like, and they did not even discuss the possibility of the Finns appearing there. So you might imagine the scale of this like government's organized suppression of memory. That's the like in one of the most popular Soviet movies about the war, which takes place right next to the Finns. There's not a single mention of any Finns at all. And this is the reason why a lot of Russians were kind of shocked that Finland wanted to join the NATO, because while the Soviet Union did, the Soviet government, the communist government did everything to suppress people's memory of the war, the Finns, well, the Soviet government, when they signed this armistice, they also had a clause like the peace treaty. They had a clause which forbade, which ordered the Finns to ban all like nationalist and fascist organizations. But you can ban an organization, but you can't prevent people from discussing it like at their whatever meetings, like it's or it was not taught at schools, but the sentiment remains, and the free access to information remains, and a lot of, well, I would say quite a lot of Finns harbored ill feelings towards the Soviet Union. So there was a huge disparity in the attitudes between the Soviet people and the Russian people, who kind of inherited whatever mentality the Soviet people had. And the Finns, because when it was like a rude awakening for a lot of Russians, like, wow, the Finns, they're so nice, they have movie trolls, and they have like Finnish coffee that we imported. What happened? How come? I mean, like, have we ever fought a single war against Finland? Wow, really? That's a sincere
That's
reaction.
because they don't listen to Finnish metal and they don't know songs about the Winter War like I do.
Well, yeah. So here you are.
Okay, Andrei, would you like to take over on this topic? Do you want to talk about the Western sort of this war in Western imagination, or make any other connections to propaganda initiatives coming from the UK or any other country that would apply here?
No, first of all, I would like to sort of go after Alexander. That I recently had this conversation with some friends of mine, precisely on the topic why have because what he described towards the Finns, and I would say even towards the Germans. Germans were never called as Germans; they were called as fascists. I mean, they weren't even fascists; they weren't even that; they were National Socialists. But of course, it was inconvenient to put the whole syntagm in place. The same thing happened here in Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, after the Second World War, there was this notion that we have been invaded again by the fascists, which is in part true because Italians did take part in invasion occupation, but that vast majority of crimes were committed either by the Germans, which weren't fascists and they were specifically Germans, or by their local allies, mostly the Croats, which had their own state. So you can argue, was the independent state of Croatia fascist or not, but it sort of misses the point. It was all done for political reasons, just like in the Soviet Union, because everybody wanted to keep sort of relationships with Finland, with Germany, and it was much more easy to obfuscate the matter by just blaming it on some abstract fascists. So there's that. Also, Yeah, I mean, as I said, there's this very weird perception which sort of lingers on still, that somehow Finns somehow won the war, which they obviously didn't. They lost it. They paid considerable price for it, both in manpower and in territory. And to be perfectly honest, considering the events in the Second World War, well, in continuation war, as they call it, I mean, I think they got pretty lightly, when considering all. I read the anecdote, which I cannot really vouch if it's true or not, but apparently in 1945, Stalin personally held a toast for the bravery of Finnish soldiers. I don't know. I read it only in one source, so it might or might not be true. Anyhow, yes, Finland was pretty leniently treated. Finlandization, which is a dirty word in American political vocabulary, is probably the best thing which could theoretically happen to Finland, because it not only protected them from the fallout of the First Cold War, it also meant that because they couldn't, they did not heavily invest in their own armed forces, which opened up the budget for social development, which is not something which most European countries, both from East or from West, could easily do, because they were pressured from West or from East to actually heavily involved in their military forces. So it was, objectively speaking, the best thing that happened to them. However, I have one question that if I ever had the opportunity to talk with somebody in power in Russia, I would like to pose them, because one of the peace treaties clauses in 1944 was this prevention of Finland joining ever again any kind of military alliance against Soviet Union. And because Russia is the legal successor of Soviet Union, legally speaking, Russia could completely justifiably declare war on Finland in 2022 when it joined NATO. And why didn't? Even before that, I mean, before it was accepted and everything else was done. Was it just a sheer inconvenience? Perhaps. But this kind of a lenient attitude toward Finland is coming around to bite Russia in the ass. Because, yes, you fought a war of aggression. We're talking about 1941, not 1939. You lost it. You signed a peace treaty. You were obliged, and yet you renegated against this. So Russia right now is fully in a legal capacity to declare war without anybody saying anything against it from a legal standpoint.
I don't even have anything to say to that, because I'm afraid to think of the consequences of Russia actually pursuing that course of action. Alexander, what do you think?
Just a couple of corrections. So when I spoke about the Finns being named fascist, there's a big difference. So whenever Germans were mentioned, they were called interchangeably Germans and fascists. Germans or German fascists. There was practically always a mention of Germans, like their ethnicity or their national belonging. Whenever it came to the Finns, sometimes I have to when I read a Soviet book on the on certain soldiers who fought against the Germans, for example. So I read about this soldier who fought against the Germans, and then there's a mention, and then he fought the fascists in summer 1944 near Leningrad. I think there were no Germans before that. There were Germans mentioned there. Germans, and then suddenly it's fascists. Well, naturally, these were the Finns when the Soviet offensive started in June 1944. So there's not a single Soviet movie, where the Finns would be shown as the Finns wearing Finnish uniform and fighting against the Soviet Union. And whenever the Soviet authors had to, they just could not miss it, they had to mention the Finns fighting the war, they called them exclusively fascists. So it was only in military historical books, that dedicated historical books, that were normally read by the soldiers in military academies, that they would mention the Finns as the Finns. Another thing is that Mannerheim never made Stalin never toasted to the Finnish soldiers. He made a formal sent formal greetings to Mannerheim as the leader at the time, but not to the Finnish soldier. But that's it.